Hello everyone. This is Dr. Priya, and today we are going to discuss breathing and exchange of gases from ncert. Now ncert is very important for NEET as well as your school exams. So breathing and exchange of gases. In the first paragraph, we can see there's a difference of breathing and respiration. What is breathing? Breathing is the mechanism of intake of oxygen and release of carbon dioxide, because obviously we know carbon dioxide is harmful for our body, so it has to be released, whereas oxygen, it provides us energy basically. And you'll learn it in your ongoing classes. And so breathing and respiration is the whole set of process that occurs in our body to generate ATP with the help of oxygen. So in the first paragraph, it's given that amino acids, fatty acids and glucose, these undergoes breakdown in the presence of O2 to form ATP to generate energy basically. So we'll not discuss respiration here, but we'll discuss breathing and how the process of breathing takes place, what are the organs of breathing. So he's written that you can place your hands in your chest and you can feel your chest moving up and down. This movement occurs as a result of breathing. Now, respiratory organs. What are respiratory organs? We've got several respiratory organs in different organisms, and this the respiratory organs varies according to the organism's habitat as well as their level of organization. Lower vertebrates such as sponges, coelenterators and flatworms, they do not have any kind of respiratory organs, no respiratory organs. They exchange their gases through simple diffusion. So these organisms do not have any kind of respiratory organs. They use the process of simple diffusion for the transport of gases in their body. Now, earthworm use their moist cuticle. Moist cuticle means they respire through their skin, cutaneous respiration, whereas insects such as cockroaches, they have a network of tubes called tracheal tubes to transport the atmospheric air inside their body. One more example of respiratory organ is gills. The respiration through gills is basically called brachial respiration, very important. And mainly aquatic arthropods or mainly aquatic animals respire through gills. Mollusks can be aquatic, but they respire through vascularized bags called lungs. Now, among vertebrates, we can see that fishes uses gills, amphibians and reptiles, fishes and mammals. Fishes, mammals, birds, they use lungs as their respiratory organ to respire. Now, we'll see that amphibians like frogs respire through moist skin called cutaneous respiration. They do have lungs in them, but they can also respire through their moist skin. Since amphibians have they live both in land and in water. That's why they are called amphibians. So they have two ways to respire. That is, they have lungs as well as they can respire through skin, which is called cutaneous respiration. Now we'll see human respiratory system. Since we are studying human physiology, so we'll mainly talk about human respiratory system. In human respiratory system, this diagram is very important. Pair of nostrils is not there, but this is the diagram you need to learn properly. So human respiratory system consists of a pair of nostrils basically, and it starts from over here. till the lungs and diaphragm. Okay, pair of external nostrils, obviously you know where nostrils are present. It is present above your upper lips, and it leads to the nasal passage. What is nasal passage? The passage through your nose till your throat is called the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into pharynx, a portion which is common passage for both food and air. So this is important. Pharynx is a common passage for both food as well as air. So from external nostrils it starts, and it goes through the pharynx, which is a common passage, and then it opens through the larynx region into the trachea. This is the trachea, you can see. This is the epiglottis. Epiglottis is a flap like structure which guards that there is no entry of food into the trachea. So the passage, you should remember this, from nostrils, pharynx, larynx, and then trachea. And trachea has rings. You can see the rings over here. It do have rings, and then it divides into tracheoles. Now what is larynx? Larynx is a cartilaginous box. This is cartilaginous, made up of cartilage, right? So this is cartilaginous box which helps in the sound production. It is also called sound box, and the basic function of larynx is sound production. Okay, so during swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. So epiglottis is a flap. This is also cartilaginous, and it is a flap, and it guards that there is no movement, there is no food going into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube. Obviously we can see here it is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity. In the thorax, this is basically the thorax region, and the trachea extends till the mid-thoracic. We can see this is the, if this is the thoracic area, it is in the middle. So it extends up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides the level 5th thoracic vertebrae into left and right primary bronchi. Now where the trachea divides, the trachea are now known as bronchi, since it is dividing, and then into bronchioles. The further division is called the bronchioles. Suppose this is trachea, now this is dividing, this is now called bronchioles, and the bronchi, and this bronchi divides further into bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchioles. The further division would be primary, secondary, tertiary. So the tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. So we can see there's a presence of ring over here, which are ring. Why is ring present? Ring is basically there to support the trachea so that the trachea cannot collapse. So each terminal bronchioles gave rise to a number of thin, irregular walled, vascularized, bag-like structure called the alveoli. Now alveoli is the basic structure for the exchange of gases. Now these bronchioles, they open into alveoli. Alveoli are very important. The branching network of bronchioles and alveoli comprises of the lungs. We can see that the lung is covered by a double layered pleura and pleural fluid. Why is there a presence of fluid in between the lung and the pleural, the layer pleura? To reduce friction. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the, we saw the pleural membrane and the pleural fluid. Now we'll talk about the conducting part and the exchange part. What is the conducting part? Conducting part basically comprises of the parts of the respiratory system which leads the air into the alveoli, and the alveoli and its ducts are basically the exchange part where the actual diffusion of O2 and CO2 takes place. So the conducting part comprises of the external nostrils till the bronchioles, whereas the exchange part only comprises of the alveoli and their ducts. So the part starting with the external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles, it also comprises of trachea. So from the external nostrils, whatever parts till the bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas alveoli and its ducts form the respiratory part. Now this conducting part is responsible for humidification of the air and bringing the air into the normal temperature. Humidification, these are very important. So conducting part basically does that, whereas the alveoli and its ducts, they helps in diffusion of O2 and CO2. Now lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is the airtight chamber. Anatomically it is airtight. There can be no air leakage. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column. So let me tell you, if this is the thoracic chamber of a person dorsally. Now ventral part and dorsal part. Dorsal part is the part which is towards the sunlight if we lay down. So dorsal part is our back basically. So at the back it is formed, the thoracic chamber is formed by vertebral column. And ventrally, what is ventrally? Ventrally is towards the front. Front is the sternum. What is the sternum? This is the sternum and the ribs. So this is called sternum. So ventrally by sternum, and dorsally by the vertebral column. Laterally by the ribs. Now sideways we can see the ribs, and in the lower side there is a muscular organ. This is a muscular organ known as diaphragm. So the anatomical setup in lungs of lungs in the thorax is such that there is any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the pulmonary cavity. So it is covered in all directions. For example, ventrally by the sternum, dorsally by the ribs, laterally we have the ribs, and dorsally we have the backbone, which is called vertebral column, and in the lower we have diaphragm. So it is an airtight chamber. Such arrangement is essential for breathing, as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. So such arrangement is very important for breathing. Now what are the steps of breathing? What happens in breathing? So breathing contains these many steps. These many steps happens in the process of breathing. Firstly, we take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. So this is called breathing or pulmonary ventilation, the intake of the oxygen and release of the carbon dioxide. Number 2 is the diffusion of gases, where in the alveoli. So diffusion of O2. So this is the alveoli and this is the blood vessel. So there is a diffusion of O2 from alveolus into the bloodstream, whereas CO2 is transported from the blood vessels into the alveoli, and there is an exchange happening. So diffusion of O2 and CO2. Number 3 is the transport of gases by the blood. Now this blood vessel will have to transport this O2 into different parts of the body, and so transportation. Number 4 is diffusion again of O2 and CO2, now not in the blood vessel or alveoli but in blood and tissues. For example, if this is the blood vessel carrying out the O2 and this is the tissue, so the O2 diffuses into the tissues and then the CO2 diffuses into the blood. So diffusion happening. Number 5, now this O2 that gets diffused into the tissue, this O2 is utilized. Basically, utilization of O2 for catabolism and anabolism, basically metabolism purposes, this O2 is required, and this metabolism we'll see in cellular respiration. So these is basically the steps of breathing. Now we'll learn about mechanism of breathing. So, mechanism of breathing. The mechanical breathing involves 2 steps, that is inspiration and expiration. Inspiration. What is inspiration? Inspiration is the What is inspiration? Inspiration in basic language is the intake of oxygen, is the intake of basically air, and expiration is releasing that air. So breathing involves 2 stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient. ऐसा नहीं है कि हम लोग खुद से air expire करते हैं. There is a pressure gradient which helps in taking the air in and out. So there is a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmospheric pressure. So inspiration can occur if pressure within the lungs is in less than the atmospheric pressure. That means there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. That's why the air out goes into the lungs. And again, while expiration, inspiration ka ulta. That means the air, the pressure gradient of our lungs is higher than that of the atmospheric pressure. So expiration takes place. Intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. What happens then? Expiration takes place. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles. Now muscles are very important for inspiration and expiration. What muscles are important? Diaphragm. Diaphragm is a muscular organ present below the ribs. So diaphragm and specialized muscles called external and internal intercostal muscles. These are present in between the ribs. This is the sternum. These are the ribs. These are present in between them. So diaphragm and external and internal intercostal muscles, they help in generating such gradient. They helps in generating the pressure gradient so that inspiration and expiration takes place. So they basically increase or decrease the volume of the thoracic chamber. Now, since we know that P is inversely proportional to volume, pressure is inversely proportional to volume. So when the diaphragm contracts, the pressure increases because the volume decreases. Similarly, when the diaphragm contracts, the same thing happens. The contraction of the external intercostal muscles lift up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. Now this will be very clear with the diagram. Here we can see the diaphragm is contracted. Diaphragm is contracted. It is curved. Contracted. Diaphragm is contracted. The volume of the thorax has increased. Volume has increased, so pressure will be decreased. Now the pressure will be decreased, the atmospheric air will be drawn in. Because the pressure is decreased than the outer atmospheric pressure, so the air will be taken in. Similarly, we can see over here, the diaphragm is relaxed. It has gone upwards towards its position. So, diaphragm is relaxed and volume is reduced. Since the volume is reduced, pressure will increase. Now, pressure is increased, so the air will be expelled out, because the pressure of the lungs is greater than the pressure of the atmospheric pressure. So, the air will be expelled out. Hence, expiration taking place. So, in this paragraph, a whole set of statements are written to explain this. I've explained in a very easy method that when the diaphragm is contracted, the volume of the thorax increases, hence the pressure decreases. So, air enters the lungs. Whereas, when the diaphragm is relaxed, so the volume of the thorax is decreased and the pressure is increased, so the air is expelled out. Similarly, ribs and sternum do their part. Ribs and sternum returning original place, and here they are raised. So this is how the process of expiration and inspiration taking place with the help of diaphragm as well as external and internal intercostal muscles. Now, so we'll learn about respiratory volumes and capacities. What are respiratory volumes and capacities? These are very easy terms. You just have to understand and learn, understand and mug it. Okay, so first we will discuss about tidal volume. What is tidal volume? Tidal volume is basically the amount of air, the volume of air inspired or expired normally. Volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. And tidal volume is, you should learn the value, it is 500 ml. 500 ml in a healthy man or woman, healthy person, it is around 500, and in a minute it's 6,000 to 8,000. So how have we calculated this? So in a normal individual, it is said that the number of times one breathes is 12 times. So it is calculated that in a minute TB would be 500 into 12, so around 6,000 ml. Now we'll see inspiratory reserve volume. What is inspiratory reserve volume? It is the additional amount of air, additional volume of air one can inspire by a forcible inspiration. Not a normal inspiration but forcible inspiration. So IRV is the amount of air inspired by a forcible inspiration, and the average is around 2,500 to 3,000 ml. Very important. Then we have expiratory reserve volume. What is expiratory reserve volume or ERV? ERV is the amount of air, similar to like IRV, is just the amount of air expired in a forcible expiration. ERV in a forcible expiration, and it is around 1,100 to 1,000. I mean 1,000 to 1,100 ml. Now, next we have residual volume. Residual volume, from the name itself, it says residual, मतलब जो बच जाता है. So amount of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. एक forcible expiration के बाद जो amount of volume that remains in our lungs is called residual volume, and it is around 1,100 to 1,200 ml. Okay, these were the volumes. Now we'll discuss about capacities. Now we can see here that it's given that we can derive these pulmonary capacities by adding the respiratory volumes. So let us see how. Inspiratory capacity: the total volume of air of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. So inspiratory capacity is total volume of the air an individual can inspire after a normal expiration. So normal expiration means TB. तो TB के बाद कितना एक पर्सन इंस्पायर कर सकता है? सो TB के बाद कितना इंस्पायर कर सकता है? टाइडल वॉल्यूम प्लस IRV, इतना एक इंडिविजुअल इंस्पायर कर सकता है आफ्टर अ नॉर्मल एक्सपिरेशन. सो टीवी का वैल्यू इज़ 500 एंड IRV इज़ अराउंड 2500 विल टेक. सो it is around 3000 ml of air. Second is expiratory capacity. Similar to the one we discussed, expiratory capacity is the total volume of air one can expire after a normal inspiration. नॉर्मल इंस्पिरेशन के बाद एक इंडिविजुअल कितना एयर एक्सपायर कर सकता है. सो इट वुड बी ऑब्वियसली टाइडल वॉल्यूम प्लस ERV. Tidal volume was 500 ml and ERV was 1000 we can take. So 1000. It is 1500. Very approximately. Now functional residual capacity. What is functional residual capacity? Volume of air, amount of air that will remain in your lungs after normal expiration. जितना बच जाता है हमारे लंग्स में कितना एयर बच जाता है आफ्टर अ नॉर्मल एक्सपिरेशन. नॉर्मल एक्सपिरेशन कर रहा है, फोर्सेबल तो कर नहीं रहा है, दैट्स वाई ERV वुड बी देयर. एंड रेसिडुअल वॉल्यूम, ऑब्वियसली रेसिडुअल वॉल्यूम रहेगा ही, क्योंकि जब ERV हो रहा होता है तभी भी द लंग्स डू नॉट गेट कोलैप्स्ड. there is some amount of air remaining. So functional residual capacity would be ERV plus RV. And now you can calculate how much is it. It is around, ERV would be 1000 ke around and RV is also 1100. So it is 2100 ke around. Right, now vital capacity. Okay, what is vital capacity? The maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forcible expiration. One have had their forcible expiration. Now the volume of air one can take is ERV, TV and IV. TV obviously normal expiration, IRV obviously normal expiration. And since यहाँ पे फोर्स एक्सपिरेशन ऑलरेडी हो रहा है तो वो द लंग वुड हैव द ERV एज वेल. So this would include TV, that is 500, IRV would be around 2500 and ERV would be around 1100 or 1000. Now total lung capacity. What is total lung capacity? The amount of air that can be accommodated in the lung. So this includes everything, RV plus IRV plus ERV plus TV, and that would be around 6000 ml. You can calculate, it would come 6000 ml. So this was your volumes, respiratory volumes and respiratory capacities. Now we'll learn about exchange of gases. How does exchange of gases takes place in our alveoli, blood vessels और tissues के बीच में, lungs और alveoli के बीच में. ये दो जगह ही exchange of gases हो रहा होता है. तो हम अब ये देखेंगे कि कैसे हो रहा होता है. What helps in the exchange of gases. Now here written, alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Obviously we all know alveoli से ही exchange हो रहा होता है और exchange part यही बनाता है. Conducting part was from the external nostrils till the bronchioles, or the exchange part involved alveoli and its ducts. So we know that alveoli is the primary site of the exchange of gases. Now exchange of gases also takes place between the blood and the tissues. blood और tissues में ही exchange होगा, तभी जाके tissues को oxygen मिलेगा और तभी जाके and so on the process will go. So exchange of gases also occur between blood and the tissues. O2 and CO2 are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusions. How do the exchange of gases takes place? By simple diffusion, which means कि यहाँ पे एक प्रेशर ग्रेडियंट बनेगा, कहीं पे O2 कम रहेगा, CO2 ज़्यादा रहेगा, तो O2 द ट्रांसफर ऑफ O2 विल टेक्स प्लेस फ्रॉम हायर कंसनट्रेशन ऑफ O2 to lower concentration of O2, and similar will happen with the carbon dioxide. So we'll see exchange in the sites of simple diffusion mainly based on pressure and concentration gradient. As I said, pressure or concentration gradient के हिसाब से. Now solubility is a very important term used, जो diffusion है और the transport है, this mainly involves around solubility of the gases as well as the thickness of membrane involved in diffusion are also important factors. So a question can be, what are the important factors for exchange of gases? So what are the concentration? Firstly, concentration gradient, solubility and thickness of membrane are very important. Now the pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure. What is partial pressure? For example, इस कंटेनर में there are gas 1, gas 2, gas 3, 3 gases. अब जो इस कंटेनर का प्रेशर है वही प्रेशर तो सब चीज़ नहीं लगा रहा है. They will have their individual pressure. Each gas will have their individual pressure. The individual pressure of a particular gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure. So यहाँ पे partial pressure of G1 would be different, partial pressure of G2 would be different, and partial pressure of G3 would be different, है ना. और Pg1 plus Pg2 plus Pg3 would be the total pressure of this container, right? And it is represented as PO2. So the partial pressure, similarly, the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our body or in atmosphere would be different from the total pressure. So it is represented as PO2 and PCO2. As partial pressure of oxygen, we'll read it as partial pressure of oxygen, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So atmosphere में और हमारे body में दोनों में different होगा इसका value, क्योंकि obviously हमारे body में difference है, तो यहाँ पे भी different ही होगा. So in this table we can see the partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 is given in atmospheric, in alveoli and blood, deoxygenated में और oxygenated में और tissues में कितना होगा. So पहले हम O2 का देखेंगे. Atmosphere में the partial pressure of O2 is around 160, that is 159. Alveoli में 104. Now deoxygenated blood में it is 40, whereas in oxygenated blood it is 95 और tissues में 40. Similarly carbon dioxide का atmosphere में 0.3, alveoli में 40, blood deoxygenated blood में 45 and oxygenated में 40, not a very huge difference, not a huge difference, and tissues में 45. So you should remember these values, very important. कभी कभी NEET में they ask the values itself, so very important. Now अब ये एक्सचेंज कैसे होता है, इस पैराग्राफ में यही बताया गया है कि एक्सचेंज कैसे होता है. वी विल अंडरस्टैंड इट इन द डायग्राम इटसेल्फ. सो दिस इज आवर एल्वियोलाई, this is the alveolus, this is pulmonary vein. What is pulmonary vein? Pulmonary vein is a vein which carries the oxygenated blood away from the towards the heart. This is pulmonary artery. What is pulmonary artery? Pulmonary artery carries blood away from the heart to the lungs. Now generally ऐसा हमने देखा है कि वेन जो होता है वो हार्ट से वो डिफरेंट पार्ट्स ऑफ द बॉडी से हार्ट की ओर ले जाता है डीऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड, बट द पल्मोनरी वेन इज एन एक्सेप्शन. सिमिलरली द पल्मोनरी आर्टरी इज अ एक्सेप्शन ऑल्सो, क्योंकि आर्टरी जनरली ऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड ले जाते हैं, बट हियर इट इज डीऑक्सीजनेटेड. सो विल सी दैट इन द नेक्स्ट चैप्टर ऑल्सो सर्कुलेशन में. नाउ यहाँ पे एल्वियोलाई में इंस्पायर्ड एयर आ रहा है एंड expired air. We'll see first as a cycle. तो inspired air में oxygen rich air we are taking in. तो alveoli में we read कि alveoli में PO2 would be 104. It is given here, and PCO2 we'll see later on. Okay, so 104. So now this the partial pressure of oxygen here is greater. हमने देखा था कि हमने देखा था यहाँ पे the alveoli में it is 104 whereas blood में it is 40, right? So this is a oxygenated blood which would come down. तो कैसे वो oxygenated होगा? The O2 would diffuse from the alveoli to the blood vessel, and then the oxygenated would be carried out this and it will carried out to till the tissues तक ये oxygenated blood पहुंचेगा. tissues में फिर हमने देखा था 40 होता है, 40 is the partial pressure and here we have 95 oxygenated में. फिर again ये diffusion का process होगा. नाउ कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड का देखेंगे टिश्यूज़ में कितना होता है. टिश्यूज़ में होता है 45. सो दिस विल गेट डिफ्यूज इनटू ब्लड वेजल्स, आई मीन इन द ब्लड, देन इट वुड बी कैरिड आउट टिल हियर बाय द पल्मोनरी आर्टरी. नाउ alveoli में इट इज़ 40, हियर इट इज़ 45. ऑब्वियसली इट विल गेट इनटू डिफ्यूज्ड इनटू alveoli और फिर ये एक्सपायर्ड हो जाएगा. सो this is all we have in exchange of gases. So it is written as the solubility of CO2 is 20-25 times higher than that of the O2, the amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much more as compared to that of O2. Very important line. So since the solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25 times more, it can get soluble more than that of the oxygen. So the diffusion membrane per unit difference is much more higher than that of O2. So CO2 बहुत ज़्यादा डिफ्यूज़ हो सकता है ब्लड में क्योंकि इसकी solubility बहुत ज़्यादा है O2 से. That's why जब भी ऐसे कुछ you are in a place where there is a fire around you, you should always keep your windows and doors open because you breathe और वो जल रहा होता है तो there's always carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, such gases there present there, so it can get diffused into your blood, so which is very harmful and it is very easy for CO2 to get dissolved in the blood, right? So very important line. The diffusion membrane is made up of 3 layers. Now जैसे ये diffusion membrane, now we'll learn about the microscopic part of the diffusion membrane, कैसे diffuse हो रहा है. We'll see this in the diagram. This is the alveolar cavity. You can see the alveolar cavity and the cells of the alveoli. These cells are thin squamous epithelium, and now you can see the blood. This is the blood vessels or blood vessels का endothelium. The squamous lining of blood vessels is called endothelium. So कितना सारे cells दिखा है हमें. alveoli का lining that is squamous or blood vessels का lining which is endothelium. Also we can see one more layer which is in yellow colored. This is the basement membrane. So 3 layers are there which are the endothelium of the alveolar capillaries, the basement substance composed of thin basement membrane supporting, and squamous epithelium of alveoli. 3 layers. The next part is transport of gases. How this transportation takes place. What is the medium of the transport? So कैसे transport हो सकता है? Blood से हो सकता है. Dissolved state में blood से कैसे होगा? Blood से you know that RBCs हेल्प्स इन द ट्रांसपोर्टेशन ऑफ ऑक्सीजन. ऑक्सीजन कैसे बाइंड होता है? हेमोग्लोबिन से बाइंड होता है. आरसीबीज में हेमोग्लोबिन होता है जो कि O2 से बाइंड होता है और बनाता है क्या? ऑक्सी हेमोग्लोबिन, राइट, ब्लड में. और क्या मीडियम है? और मीडियम है प्लाज्मा के साथ कंबाइन होके डिसॉल्व्ड स्टेट में O2 या CO2 का हो सकता है ट्रांसपोर्टेशन. सो अगर हम O2 का देखें तो O2 97% ऑफ O2 is transported in the blood RBCs. So 97%, it is also written here, 97% O2 is transported by RBCs in the blood. Remaining 3% कैसे होगा? Dissolved in plasma. Now CO2, since we know that CO2 का जो diffusion rate है, solubility है, that is much higher than that of the oxygen. So most of the CO2 would be transported as dissolved, right? So nearly 20 to 25% of CO2 is transported by RCBs, where the 70% is carried out by a bicarbonate. What is bicarbonate? CO3 2 minus, this is bicarbonate. Or 7% would be dissolved through plasma. We have 3 cases. RBCs से कितना CO2 ट्रांसपोर्ट होगा? जस्ट 20 to 25%. वेयर एज बाइकार्बोनेट बनेगा तो कितना ट्रांसपोर्ट होगा? नियरली 70%, एंड द रिमेनिंग वुड बी इन डिसॉल्व्ड स्टेट. ओके, so this much we should learn now. So now we'll learn about transport of oxygen. How does the transportation of oxygen takes place in our body? So as we know, O2 is transported by RBCs and in dissolved plasma state, dissolved plasma. So in these two ways, O2 can be transported from the alveoli to the blood and from blood to our tissues. तो ये कैसे होता है? RBCs में हम जानते हैं ये 70% ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्टेशन RBCs में ही होता है. 97% ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्टेशन RBCs में ही होता है, और डिसॉल्व्ड ओनली 3% इज ट्रांसपोर्टेड इन डिसॉल्व स्टेट. अब RBCs में हम जानते हैं क्या होता है? हेमोग्लोबिन होता है. RBCs का बेसिक फंक्शन ही ऑक्सीजन ट्रांसपोर्टेशन होता है. तो हेमोग्लोबिन होता है. हेमोग्लोबिन ऑक्सी हेमोग्लोबिन बनाता है O2 के साथ मिलकर, और इसका ट्रांसपोर्टेशन होता है. अब हाउ डज दिस O2 बाइंड्स टू द हेमोग्लोबिन? तो एक रिएक्शन होता है जिसमें हेमोग्लोबिन बाइंड्स विद 4 ऑक्सीजन फॉर इट्स ट्रांसपोर्टेशन. सो मैक्सिमम 4 ऑक्सीजन कैन बी कैरिड आउट बाय 1 मॉलिक्यूल ऑफ हेमोग्लोबिन. So we can see here it's written each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of O2. Now this binding or the transportation of oxygen is related to the partial pressure of O2. Very important, as we discussed earlier. The partial pressure of O2, the partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration, temperature and other factors can interfere with this binding. यहाँ पे जो बाइंड हो रहा है इसमें partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration as well as temperature plays a very important role in the binding of this O2 for its transportation, and we get a sigmoid curve. This curve is known as oxygen dissociation curve. This is a sigmoid shaped curve, and this shows that this curve is oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying the effect of factors like partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration. This curve is very important for your exam point of view. Now we'll see in alveoli there is a higher concentration of partial pressure of O2. There is a high O2 because gaseous exchange takes place there only, so there's high O2 in alveoli and low CO2. So the partial pressure of CO2 is less as compared to that of O2. We also have conditions like lesser H plus concentration and lower temperature. So the conditions are very favorable for oxyhemoglobin formation. So the oxyhemoglobin formation takes place easily in the alveoli, whereas in tissues these conditions are not favorable. For example, there is low concentration of O2 and high concentration of CO2, whereas there is high concentration of hydrogen ions, as well as there is much higher temperature than that of the alveoli, and this is not favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. So this clearly indicates that O2 gets bound to the hemoglobin in the lung surface and get dissociated at the tissues. For every 100 ml of, very important again, for every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of O2. For every 100 ml there can be 5 ml of O2. Now ट्रांसपोर्टेशन ऑफ कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड. हमने देखा कि ऑक्सीजन कैसे ट्रांसपोर्ट हो रहा था, अब हम देखेंगे कैसे कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड ट्रांसपोर्ट हो रहा था. फ्रॉम प्रीवियस नॉलेज वी नो दैट कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड आरबीसी से भी होता है ट्रांसपोर्ट, फिर डिसॉल्व स्टेट में भी होता है और बाइकार्बोनेट के फॉर्म में भी होता है. राइट, सो in these three forms or ways carbon dioxide is transported in our body. So CO2 is carried out by hemoglobin. Now RBCs definitely have hemoglobin, and hemoglobin binds to both oxygen and carbon dioxide. So oxygen में वो oxyhemoglobin बना रहा था, but when it binds to carbon dioxide it forms carbinohemoglobin. It is written over here, it's formed carbinohemoglobin, and only 20 to 25% of carbon dioxide is transported in this form. This binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2. Now this binding mainly depends upon the partial pressure of O2. Partial pressure of O2 is a major factor which affects this binding. No temperature, no H plus ions, but only partial pressure of O2. Now when PCO2 is high and PO2 is low, such as in tissues, then the binding of carbon dioxide will take place. But when PCO2 would be low and PO2 would be high, there would be dissociation of this carbinohemoglobin and formation of oxyhemoglobin. Right, so it's also written over here, when PCO2 is high and O2 is low, more binding of carbon dioxide. Similarly, when PCO2 is low and PO2 is high, like in alveoli, dissociation of CO2 takes place from carbinohemoglobin, which is bound to the hemoglobin from the tissues delivered at the alveoli. Now RBCs contain a very high concentration. Now in blood we have, since CO2 when forms bicarbonate, it is definitely acidic in nature. The bicarbonate is acidic in nature and there is more H plus ions in the blood, but the blood of the pH should be maintained. It shouldn't get acidic. तो वो pH maintain कौन करेगा? There's a enzyme present called carbonic anhydrase. So RBCs contain a very high concentration of this enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and the minute quantities of the same is present in plasma also. In RBCs as well as in plasma, this carbonic anhydrase is present, and this facilitates this reaction. What is this reaction? Carbon dioxide plus water forms this bicarbonate. This is the bicarbonate, and now this carbonate gets into the form of bicarbonate ion. So carbonic acid facilitates this formation of bicarbonate and bicarbonate ion. Now
At the tissue site where partial pressure of CO2 is high due to catabolism, CO2 diffuses into the blood and forms HCO3- and H+. Whereas at alveolar site where PCO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in an opposite way. This says that when the partial pressure of CO2 is high, for example in tissues, this reaction takes place, the formation of H2CO3 takes place. Whereas in alveoli, where the partial pressure of CO2 is low as compared to that of the tissues, this reaction takes place and it forms bicarbonate ion. Thus CO2 is trapped as carbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as CO2. Now we saw that every 100 ml of oxygenated blood delivered only 5 ml of O2. Now we can see that here every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers 4 ml of CO2. This is very important for your MCQs also. We saw here that every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver 5 ml of O2. रेगुलेशन ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन. अब रेस्पिरेशन है तो इसका रेगुलेशन सेंटर भी होना चाहिए, बिकॉज सेंटर होना चाहिए क्योंकि एबिलिटी होना चाहिए टू मेंटेन एंड मॉडरेट द रेस्पिरेटरी पैटर्न, द रेस्पिरेटरी रिदम. कोई इंसान दौड़ रहा है तो ही विल और शी विल डेफिनेटली नीड मोर अमाउंट ऑफ ऑक्सीजन इन हिज बॉडी. So to meet the demands of the body, a respiratory regulation should be present in the body that can maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm. So in our body it is done by the neural system. A neural system is present in our medullary region and pons region of our brain that regulates the respiratory pattern. So it is written here, a neural system se regulate hota है and a specialized center called the respiratory rhythm center, which is present in the medullary region, is responsible for this regulation. सिर्फ एक नहीं, there's one more center is present in the pons region of the brain called the pneumotactic center, very important pneumotactic center, and this can also moderate the function of the respiratory rhythm of the respiration. Now neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. The neural signal from the two regions, from the pneumotactic center as well as from the respiratory rhythm center, can alter the inspiration rate. For example, it can increase the inspiration rate when the body needs high amount of oxygen, or it can decrease the rate when it doesn't need high amount of oxygen. So a chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly. Now how does this medullary region, the pons region में जो present है pneumotactic center और the respiratory rhythm center, कैसे इसको पता चलता है that body needs high amount of oxygen? कैसे पता चलता है? There is a chemosensitive area. What is chemosensitive? What is the meaning of chemosensitive? Chemosensitive मतलब कोई भी chemical से जो area sensitive है. For example, यहाँ पे अगर there is as we have learned, the partial pressure of O2 definitely gets affected by the H plus ion concentration. तो अगर H plus ion concentration बढ़ रहा है, this chemosensitive area would be sensitive to it. So a chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythmic center, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. So CO2 और hydrogen ions, अगर the chemosensitive area में if this detects there is an increase in the amount of CO2 or in H plus ions, right, it detects this in the body and sends a signal to the rhythm center to make necessary adjustments in the respiratory process by which these substances can be eliminated. Also, there are receptors present, receptors associated with the aortic arch and carotid artery. अब ये aortic arch और carotid artery कहाँ present है? ये हमारे heart में present है, right? So can also recognize changes in CO2 and H plus and send necessary signals to the rhythmic center for remedial actions. The role of oxygen in regulation center quite insignificant. Oxygen is not significant for the role for the detection that does our body require higher amount of O2 or not is very insignificant. But partial pressure of CO2 and H plus ions, the detection of these two helps the body regulate the respiratory pattern. Now disorders, the last topic we have is disorders of respiratory system. What are the disorders of respiratory system? There are many. We'll read about 3. First is asthma. It's written asthma, but we call it asthma. Asthma is difficulty in breathing. I do have asthma, so I know this is a very very problematic kind of disorder. Not a disease, but it is a disorder. And so it is basically difficulty in breathing, causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. It is not a lung disease, it is not a external nostril disease. The passage of the air, where the air is transported, it is a disease of the conducting part of the respiratory system. So it gets inflamed, and it often gets mucus are present in your external nostrils to prevent the dust particles going into the lungs. So the inflammation and increase in the mucus leads to asthma, and there's a difficulty in breathing. What is epiphysema? Epiphysema is a chronic disorder. धीरे धीरे होता है. Epiphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls get damaged, and this is basically due to smoking cigarettes. Very bad for health. One shouldn't do it, not even because of the peer pressure. So it is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged. The alveolar walls ही नहीं है तो exchange of gases कहाँ से होगा? So it leads to respiratory surface is decreased. Obviously walls ही damage हो जाएगा तो फिर there would be no exchange of gases. Third is occupational respiratory disorders. These disorders only happen to people जैसे कोई अगर mines में work कर रहा है or some other places where the conditions are not good. They often respire through a lot of dust, through a lot of coal dust or whatever dust. So in certain industries, especially involving grinding stone breaking, so much of dust is produced. So this dust affects the defense mechanism of the body, and the defense mechanism cannot fully cope with it. So longer exposure leads to inflammation, leading to fibrosis. Very important. Fibrosis, proliferation of fibrous tissues. The fibrous tissues present in our respiratory system gets proliferated, and thus causing serious lung damage. And for protection, workers should wear protective masks. This is all for your respiration. I hope you liked the video. Please like, share and subscribe. It gives me motivation, and please tell me what improvement